Sequels are a tricky business. You're often creating them because of the success of the original. Through a practical and financial lens, they make sense. More and better this time. Expectations are high and oftentimes budgets are even higher. From a design perspective, sequels are easier than creating an entire new game. You've established the game's core pillars, its loop, gotten used to your engine, know what your production pipelines and timelines look like. It allows you to explore all those abandoned and unfeasible ideas that the original was forced to shed. But at the end of the day, the person playing the game may only care if it's better. Before we delve into things, summing this whole thing up makes a bunch of sense. And the high-level takeaway is that Tenchu, Birth of the Stealth Assassins is a sequel that ultimately skirts better in favor of different. It is the equivalent of going from Alien to Aliens. In favor of a tighter, more intimate experience, it sets its sights on bigger and better. And while there's a heavier focus on narrative, it loses its authenticity and Japanese atmosphere that permeated Stealth Assassin, an improvement mechanically and narratively at the cost of part of its soul along the way. Birth of the Stealth Assassins divided critics more than its predecessor. The likes of IGN and GameSpot ranked the game in the 80s and 90s. Outlets praised the improved size of the levels, wider variety of ninja tools and gameplay enhancements, as well as the enemy AI and mission editor, though criticized its poor graphics in comparison to the newly released Dreamcast and PlayStation 2 consoles. If you take a peek at its Metacritic, it sits at 77, so there must have been some conflicting reviews, right? Combing through all the gaming mags transported me right back to my childhood. While game criticism and coverage wasn't exactly new, reviews and magazines have been coming out for years, it still had a very juvenile approach to the writing. I'm not saying it's bad, it's just very of its time. Not only that, some of the stylistic choices with text alignment verge on visual insanity. Not to get all how do I jump like that often quoted Cuphead review, but in GameFan, the reviewer had trouble completing the training mission, claiming it can't be skipped when you can just hop up to Shunsai's house. There's some valid criticism in the review about the draw distance and graphical fidelity. I just don't know if the scribbles that constitute walls, roads and buildings look like they were penciled by an epileptic 6-year-old on a plane in heavy turbulence. That may be a little overkill. Despite that, GameFan still gave it a 79, so I guess our review metrics haven't changed all that much over the years. Ben Lawrence from Play criticized the game's control scheme, comparing it to trying to navigate through levels is like pushing a shopping trolley. It can't fault him there. While it's better than Stealth Assassins due to having more literal space to slowly turn, it rears its ugly head during boss encounters most. Of the characters, Ben comments that Ayame is a little less buoyant up front, straight on the watch list. But it is interesting to see his comparison to the first game, saying that a little more imagination has blessed this offering, which ties into a bigger shift in design ethos we'll get into later. Despite a few gripes, Play gave the game a 91. Maybe it would have been a perfect 100 if Ayame had more cake. Guess we'll never know. Oh, and out of all the reviews, there seemed to be some unsung agreement of having to mention Metal Gear Solid in the article as some kind of MK Ultra type reflex to Kojima, which I'm now going to do myself. Whoa! The first entry in the series, Tenchu Stealth Assassins, was released in 1998 alongside other heavy hitters, or more appropriately silent killers, such as Metal Gear Solid and Thief the Dark Project. Whereas MGS's next game, Sons of Liberty, would release in November 2001, both Thief 2, The Dark Age and Tenchu, Birth of the Stealth Assassins would release in November and August of the year 2000 respectively. The 2000s would also mark the release of the first game in another seminal stealth franchise, Hitman. And in terms of longevity, Agent 47's managed to outlive both Rikimaru and Garrett. 18 months to turn around a totally new entry in a game series may seem unbelievable by today's 4 to 6 year development cycles. Published by Activision, Acquire brought on more developers internally to work on the project, totaling 30 now. And if the relatively short turnaround time for the game isn't a shock, it cost just 200 million yen, around 1.3 million pounds in Y2K and around 2.3 million pounds in now to develop. Originally, Birth of the Stealth Assassins was only to be released. Holy shit, is that Frankie Muniz?
Yes, no, maybe. I don't know. Can you repeat the question? You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss of me now, and you're not so big. You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss of me now. You're not the boss of me now, and you're not so big. Life is unfair.
Okay, Birth of the Stealth Assassins was only to be released and designed for Western markets, Europe and America. Kind of strange, right? This was mandated from the publisher and feels primarily like a decision made in a boardroom rather than in reality. The entire reason the original Tenchu had been a success, flawed as it was because Endo and his crew had made the game they wanted, with little external influence. In fact, while the game had sold over 1 million copies overseas, its numbers in Japan were around 250k, so it certainly seemed like that demand existed. I can only imagine this stems from companies that have a habit of looking at what was successful during that period. Potentially MGS, Resident Evil 2 and 3, maybe the more action-oriented games released for the consoles, and saying maybe make it more like that. Funnily enough, the reason they chose a prequel was so that if a true sequel arrived in Japan, there were no continuity issues, which slightly parallels Resident Evil 3. Originally, Resi 3 was supposed to be more of a side story or spin-off than a canon next entry in the series, but pressure from above changed all that. If you were to put a katana to my throat and ask me to describe what makes Birth of the Stealth Assassins more oriented to Western audiences, I honestly couldn't tell you. It strikes me as more of a situation about what was left out rather than what was left in. Ideological clashes didn't just surface from the game's production, but its architecture too. Takuma Endo, the game's director, had wanted to release it on the PS2 but was unfamiliar with the console's architecture. For Tenchu Stealth Assassins, one of the main issues they'd run into during development was creating a game for an entirely new platform, so it seemed like the soundest decision at the time. Whether that was Endo's decision or Activision's, I can't be sure, though the game appeared to be created on a much tighter leash than the original. Despite it all, work on Birth of the Stealth Assassins continued. Help Endo as director, production duties were handled by Masami Yamamoto of Sony Music Entertainment Japan, with Activision's Pat Dwyer filling in the role of associate producer. Tenchu Birth of the Stealth Assassins was a difficult game to create, technical limitations notwithstanding. In an honestly quite refreshing interview on Acquire's website, Endo leaves behind a lot of regret. He outright apologizes for the poorly made parts of the game, a lack of more Japan-centric elements such as characters like Echigoya and the long loading times, but he wanted to release it in Japan for the fans. To him, stuck between a transition period on the way to the PlayStation 2's greener pastures, the prequel, him at least, was not acquired at its Grandmaster level. What's saddest of all is that Endo would never have the opportunity to bring Tenchu to the PlayStation 2. In November 2000, an Activision press release announced that they had purchased the rights from Sony Music Entertainment Japan. I can only assume that in the original publishing deal that Acquire had with Sony, ownership of the IP was also included in the agreement. To see an original IP that you and your team had fought to create, which became a smash hit, to be then taken away from you after a troubled development process can only sting. Make It Bigger seems to be the design ethos under which the game was created, turning diorama-like levels of the original into more open sandboxes. In retrospect, this direction is more of a true realization of what Endo wanted for Tenchu's level design. Though he wouldn't return to the Tenchu series until Shadow Assassins, his next foray into the stealth game genre with Shinobi boasted even larger levels by comparison. But going big or going home is a double-edged sword for the stealth genre. Broadly, because Tenchu Birth of the Stealth Assassins levels are larger and more open than the majority of the original, you have to fill those levels. This meant that above all, enemy placement suffered the greatest. It left less room to ask the player difficult questions on how to tackle situations or navigate an environment. Conversely, by giving the player greater freedom on how to approach an issue in Birth of the Stealth Assassins, the game's systems or situations aren't emergent enough to warrant much more than stab them while they're not looking. In Stealth Assassins, this was often a result that came after carefully monitoring an enemy and being cautiously aware of your environment. Who else is around? Who can see me? Will I make it in time? Birth of the Stealth Assassins has very few instances that capture the original's tension because fundamentally it's a game that asks the same question its predecessor did but answers differently. Often posed during pre-production, this question is, how do you want the player to feel? For Tenchu, it's, do I want the player to feel like a ninja or do I want the player to feel like an assassin? It's here where a philosophical design difference occurs. In Birth of the Stealth Assassins, you're the latter. Grandmaster rank in the game encapsulates this. 90% of the time, earning a Grandmaster rank means that you have eliminated every enemy in the level and done so without being seen. In Tenchu Stealth Assassins, simply completing the level undetected earns you the rank. Opening up the levels feels like a response to one of Stealth Assassin's more apparent flaws. The draw distance, it was awful, but that's forgivable due to technical constraints. However, it wasn't quite a bug, but a feature. A shorter draw distance forced the player to be even more cautious as they slinked through missions. You had to rely on your key meter in order to get a bead on an enemy's location. In response to the further draw distance, it feels as if the key meter's radius has been nerfed so that it doesn't start ticking up until you're relatively close to your target. However, being able to literally see further combined with open levels, you'll often clock your target before the meter lights up. Along with the increased level size, Tenchu Birth of the Stealth Assassins brought relatively few changes to the table. Movement generally feels a little faster when you're not drawing your blade at least. Circle is now the dedicated strafe button. There are tons of new items for you to play around with. Stealth kills have been expanded, and who could forget a mission editor. However, one thing painfully absent from Birth of the Stealth Assassins is the soundtrack, which I can only assume is due to the technical limitations at the time. But it wasn't just the draw distance that saw expansion, so did the game's narrative. Unlike Stealth Assassins, Birth of the Stealth Assassins was to be tied together by its story, penned by Mikasa Hiragi of Studio Angina. Thematically, the game deals with finding purpose or one's place in the world, which touches both protagonists and antagonists. I hope you like hearing the word dream, because it's going to be living in your head rent-free at the end of this game.
My people follow orders, but they fight for a dream. Dream. Dream.
Dream?
Dream. Dream.
Dream.
Dream.
Dream.
Dream.
Dream.
Dream. Dream.
Dream.
So, you're a...
Stop shouting!
The nature of a prequel lends itself to this, but there were a number of other considerations as to why we're exploring Rikimaru and Ayame's early years. Along with Endo's creative decision that a prequel wouldn't leave players in Japan confused, Pat Dwyer, the associate producer at Activision's Japan studio, gave what I'd consider a slightly more diplomatic reason for a prequel in a designer diary on GameSpot. The first challenge we faced was finding a reasonable way to resolve the unknown fate of Rikimaru at the end of Tenchu. Here, we did what any creative game design team would do. We decided to create a prequel. He also touches on Tenchu's lack of character development in the original game, as well as a prequel providing an opportunity to build suspense over what happened to Rikimaru at the end of the original. It's an interesting take. In my retrospective on Tenchu Stealth Assassins, I touched on the idea that because Rikimaru and Ayame received next to no character development, the player is free to impress their own identity onto the characters, informed by pop culture. Mikasa Hiragi did an excellent job in not only fleshing out the protagonist, but production and design allowed the narrative to breathe. Cutscenes are longer, not by MGS standards, but it's the only game in the series that puts the story and characterization on equal footing with other game elements. Before and beyond Birth of the Stealth Assassins, the narrative's more of a stick to prod the player into the next level. It's a real shame. The cast of colourful characters beyond just Rikimaru and Ayame are interesting, they're just never given a chance to develop. This is a problem we see really come to a head in Tenchu Wrath of Heaven, but we're not quite there yet. Unlike the multiple releases of Tenchu Stealth Assassins, one which included the first iteration of the mission editor, there were just two versions of Birth of the Stealth Assassins. Why? Well, it's because Activision didn't want to release the game in its native Japan, so Acquire took up the job themselves. So, after a long and troubled road, we're finally ready to see where it all began. After the fall of the old regime, Japan is in the midst of a brutal civil war. Daimyo, feudal warlords, wage bloody campaigns across the land in the hopes of staking a claim to Kyoto, the country's capital at the time. It's not long before this struggle spills over into Lord Gohda Matsunoshin's land, forcing him to call on the Azuma Ninja to protect his family and territory from a new threat emerging from the ashes of war. But before all that, it's time for school. Regardless of whether you choose Rikimaru or Ayame, our story begins in the same place, the Azuma Ninja village. Removed from territorial conflict, sequestered deep in the mountains, the village is a place of peace and serenity, which belies the nature of its inhabitants. There are onsen hot springs, rushing waterfalls, simple shacks, and a startling lack of anyone below the age of, I'm going to say, 80. Chances are, the cats wandering around the village are older than our game's protagonist. There's like one kid. In a bit of trivia, in an interview on Acquire's website, Ayako Takanaga says that the pigeon during this cutscene, and others, was voiced by someone famous. After a brief introduction to Master Shunsai, leader of the Azuma Ninja, and voiced by Colonel Campbell, our chosen ninja is tasked with finishing their training. Unlike Tenchu Stealth Assassins, this game's tutorial is delivered somewhat more diegetically. It's not a separate option on the main screen, but built into the environment. While optional, why wouldn't you listen to what your senpai Tatsumaru has to say? New players are walked through the game's various mechanics, items, movement, stealth, and the addition of swimming and hiding underwater. There are even a couple of intruders for you to practice your stealth kills on. One slightly, at least in my eyes, controversial take with one of the game's new features is your ability to sheathe your weapon. While sheathed, your character will run slightly faster than if their weapon was drawn. Good for closing gaps after you've been staking out a target. Bad because the game will not auto-draw your weapon if you transition from gameplay into a boss battle. It's an idea that seems logical in world. From a pure gameplay perspective, it kinda sucks. If you want to move quickly, you're forced to sheathe your weapon after each stealth kill. However, it does seem like an apt punishment when you're caught slipping by the enemy and have to perform the weapon drawer of shame while your opponent hacks away at you. Training, however, is short and sweet. Along with familiarizing the player with the game's controls, it plays a subtle yet important role by acclimating you to the environment, which won't pay off for some time. Whether you choose to train or not, your destination lies at the peak of the village, Master Shionsai's hut. For Rikimaru, even in the short scene within the hut, we get a clearer picture of his character, diligent yet enthusiastic to a fault that often comes with youth. At around 18 years old, he's at a time of his life and in the narrative where he's not truly being tested beyond the confines of the village, but feels he's strong enough to take on the world. But before we get to the world, Master Shionsai pulls a fast one on Rikimaru. A trapdoor gives way, awfully convenient, to send Rikimaru plunging into the depths of the mountain where a number of intruders had taken up residence. Like the guys in the forest, let's put a pin in those, it pays off later. For Ayame, this first level plays out much the same way. We see the beginnings of a cockier, outspoken personality that hints at the sarcastic woman she'd become in Tenchu Stealth Assassins. Younger than Rikimaru by a few years, her age was a point of contention for some audiences. In an interview with Endo, he speaks about some players feeling that because Ayame is technically around 14 years old in Birth of the Stealth Assassins, her slaughtering a bunch of dudes is kind of traumatizing. Something I'd never even considered when playing the games all those years ago. Within fiction, especially work that's set way back when, it's not uncommon to effectively have child soldiers. Oftentimes it's commentary on the regime that implemented it, the state of the world, the emotional journey a character goes on under those circumstances. There's a narrative point that's being made. When considered within the context of manga and anime, no one really bats an eyelid. Though strange and often horrifying, it's not unbelievable within that work's world. In Tenchu Birth of the Stealth Assassins, Ayame travels quite a dark emotional path which informs the character that she becomes. Given the precarious ground that's being trodden, it's handled quite well, though each journey begins with a single step, and for Rikimaru and Ayame, that is a test from the master, the game's first proper level. It's a dark, simple cavern dotted with enemies meant to teach the player how to experience the moment-to-moment gameplay. We see different guard patrols and patterns in real time, need to make use of wall hugging and crouching, traps, and utilizing alternate paths to your destination, a microcosm of what ensues. An aspect missing from this, which is endemic to the entire game, is the shift away from verticality, which is much less pronounced than the original. After reaching the end of the level, Rikimaru meets Shionsai behind the village's waterfall, receiving our first level evaluation. How you're now graded on your performance in a level is one of the larger shakeups to the game. I touched on it when talking about the game's design ethos. Grandmaster now means practically eliminating every enemy in a level and often staying unseen. You're more assassin than ninja. While this change does encourage the player to explore levels further in order to kill the most enemies, it doesn't quite fit into the mythos of the ninja. They aren't mass murderers, they're precise, efficient. My issue isn't so much that you can murder enemies to increase your score the game after all, it is that it's the only way to achieve a Grandmaster rank. Another feature of the grading system that still eludes me to this day is the moves evaluation. This is never explained anywhere. I've looked online and no one seems to mention it anywhere. After finishing a mission, you'll look at the score and simply be met with confusion. I think it's there to evaluate a number of criteria per mission, such as the variety of stealth kills, items you utilize, number of enemies you kill, and potentially a few other factors. It would have been nice if the evaluation included a further breakdown of what this is exactly, and I'm still unclear if it actually means anything. However, whether you snuck by or went ham, Master Shionsai doles out our first official mission as fully fledged Azuma Ninja, the Gang of Thieves. In the Gang of Thieves, Rikimaru and Ayame will both travel to a mountain village that has been besieged by thieves and bandits. The mission itself introduces a fact that may not have struck you while gallivanting around the Azuma Ninja village. There's daylight now. Tenchu Stealth Assassins was entirely set during nighttime, not just for aesthetic reasons, but because of engine limitations. With the engine improvements present in both Birth of the Stealth Assassins, while it may seem a little counterintuitive, ninjas are just as deadly regardless of the time of day. But just because you can, doesn't mean that you should. The night in stealth games is just a vibe. It's a functional and aesthetic choice. Roaming around in the daylight just feels a little off. However, there is a mechanical impact in missions set during different hours. With the sunshine comes enemies being able to spot you from further away. At night, you can practically sneak right on by unnoticed. When Rikimaru reaches the village, the sun's up. He finds himself in a scorched, arid land situated and secluded in the mountains. His target, the leader of the thieves gang, Garan. You start your career as a ninja with very few items at your disposal. The bare necessities for both Rikimaru and Ayame are the healing potion, shuriken, caltrops, and coloured rice. There are two ways to acquire new items, both of which I never really paid much attention to when playing the game years ago. During most levels, it's possible to find a package containing an item. Once found, it's added to your inventory, and depending on how you do on subsequent missions, your stock of the item will increase. For instance, in the Gang of Thieves, you can find a poison antidote in the remains of a destroyed house. The other method for acquiring items is earning a set number of Grandmaster ranks on stages. Every few Grandmaster ranks, regardless of character, you'll be rewarded with a new item. Ninja armor, the always useful enemy disguise, those kinds of things. You can also pilfer items from enemies that you assassinate, and the type of enemy you've downed determines the most likely items you will receive. A ninja, for instance, has a good chance of having a blow dart, a smoke bomb, or a grenade stuffed down the pants. Along with all the other goodies that you can scavenge, levels have a few more things in store for the player. Tenchu Stealth Assassins had the occasional bottomless pit or lava stream you had to avoid, but in Birth of the Stealth Assassins you'll find sneakier obstacles in your way. Pathways are often littered with noise-making cans, bulging plots of earth stuffed with explosives, or traditional arrow trap switches in an effort to promote player caution. The Gang of Thieves serves as a soft introduction to a number of the challenges we'll see ramp up in intensity the further we progress in the game. All levels are basically wide, open spaces, sandboxes, so let's just get that out of the way now. Here, however, though enemies are spaced quite far apart, which is a trend for all the levels to a greater or lesser extent, the terrain undulates quite a bit. It's an area of peaks and valleys, often featuring guards overlooking key areas. An addition that debuted in Tenchu Stealth Assassins across the checkpoint mission, being able to grapple up to desiccated tree branches, makes a return here. In many missions, you're on even footing with enemies, as there are generally fewer literal and figurative opportunities to get the drop on them. The level itself is quite sparse, which fits the motif of a secluded village, but you definitely lose the tighter, handcrafted nature the original game had. There are a couple of reasons for this. One is hardware limitations and how much stuff you can have in an environment without it becoming a bloated, choppy mess. The other is time. It takes time to set dress a level, optimize it, and generally create new assets that you want to place in it. Tenchu Stealth Assassin's approach to level design was tight and dense, while Birth of the Stealth Assassins aims for wide but shallow. But it's not a case for better or worse, just different. As you'll do for most missions in the game, first time through, you're literally getting the lay of the land. Your map only fills in the sections you've visited. In the first game, it was handed right to you. Obviously, this was done to promote exploration, put you in the way of enemies, find items. The size of the levels also allows you to have multiple scenarios for each ninja. While Rikimaru is facing off with Garan, Ayami's infiltration takes place at night. The two begin in roughly the same area, but the Kunoichi's destination lies to the northwest of the map. To switch things up, enemy placements have changed, and more are available through each mission's various layout options. One important feature to note is that each ninja is required to locate each of the mission-specific items, while items earned through Grandmaster rankings are shared. Rikimaru's time in the village ultimately sees him face off with one of the dynamic duo, Garan, giving us similar vibes to his future fateful encounter with Echigoya. Ayame, meanwhile, faces off with Boron, leader of the mountain bandits, who phase shifts through the mountain wall on his trusty steed. Now here is where we need to talk about combat in Birth of the Stealth Assassins. In Stealth Assassins, I gave Acquire a pass, being their first game on the PlayStation and all, but for this game, combat is woeful, trash. While both yours and enemies' attacks are quicker, your attacks have next to no reach. What often happens is you have to start your attacks earlier, because if you try to close the gap, the enemy will then attack you and you'll be hit. And what happens if you do, by some miracle, hit the opponent, you often end up pushing past them and having to readjust. But of course, there is no quick way to do that. So you then get hit in the back and are knocked over and then stun locked into defeat. To have this happen after spending a good few minutes on a mission is, in a word, demoralizing. It is perhaps one of the worst 3D battle systems I have ever played with. A lock-on ability wasn't needed, it should have been mandatory. How people looked at the game and thought, that is good enough to ship, is beyond me. It's abysmal, and it often dictates the way you handle boss encounters. The safest and most efficient way of dealing with bosses is through the use of items, preferably powerful explosive items such as grenades, flaming arrows, and mines. These types of items are near mandatory due to the fact that not everyone has a DualShock controller at the time, and owing to the game's tank controls, restricting movement to the analog sticks wasn't an option. Honestly, I think they should have just relented and had one of the L2 or R2 buttons stand in for lock-on and just sacrifice the ability to scroll in one direction for your item. And as it was in Tenchu Stealth Assassins, quaffing a healing potion is an exercise in risk versus reward. This time, it's more risk. With your sword out, you move slower. Bosses are quicker than you, so will often catch up before there is a chance to heal. In more open spaces, you can sometimes generate enough distance to heal. In tighter areas, you'd better have brought some caltrops with you or have a means to first blast the enemy from a safe distance. I generally think it is one of the biggest flaws in not just the game, but the entire series. They could never quite crack it. Oh yeah, and the fact that the onus is on the player to preemptively draw their weapon before a boss encounter is ludicrous. It's not always clear exactly when some boss encounters will occur, so you're often blindsided when it begins, and the boss is so close to you, they could reach out and stroke your pixelated face. Regardless if you defeated Garan with Rikimaru or Boron with Ayame, both ninjas return to their village, commencing Act 1 of the game, the Red Lotus. Titling the first chapter The Red Lotus could have a number of symbolic meanings in Birth of the Stealth Assassin. Symbolically, the lotus represents purity, enlightenment, and rebirth in Japanese culture. You often find them in the palm of Buddhist statues. At dawn, the flower opens before the harsh noon sun forces them closed. The lotus is also related to the Bon or Obon festival. We often know it as the Lantern Festival in the West. Fire is a component of the festival, so the burning Gohda Castle we'll eventually infiltrate acts as quite a stark representation of this. The next mission, Treason at Gohda Castle, is a turning point for our protagonists. It's in the flames of Gohda Castle where Rikimaru, Ayame, Tatsumaru, and even Gohda begin to form the reason for walking their chosen path, and how those paths ultimately diverge. We begin the act with the news that the senior Lord Gohda has died. His lands and titles have been bequeathed to his son, Gohda Matsunoshin, the guy handing out your missions from the first game. However, the newly minted Lord Gohda is facing some resistance from his uncle Motohide. He's used his power and influence to turn a number of samurai to his cause, and they have since laid siege to Gohda's castle. Master Shionsai calls in his students to his side. 3 young ninja against an entire enemy force seems like a bit of an ask. It's here that you're more formally introduced to the other members of the clan, with Yakuza-like nameplates for whomever you're not playing as. If you're playing as Rikimaru or Ayame, this is the first time you're able to put a name to the voice in the opening tutorial, Tatsumaru. It's at this moment Shionsai confers the Izayoi blade, Tatsumaru. Wonder how Rikimaru ends up with that later, hey? The name itself means 16-day-old moon. There's quite a bit to unpack with the name of the blade, which could be translated to full moon blade, as it's on the 16th night of the lunar calendar when the moon is full. Within waka, traditional Japanese poetry, it's often seen as something especially beautiful, and this extends to Japanese art and culture in general. With all the goodies handed out, your mission now is to reach Gohda Castle. Our characters arrive on a rainy night, the castle ablaze, to find it overrun with Motohide's warriors busy slaughtering innocents and guards alike. It's about now that the narrative forks. Tatsumaru orders Ayame to locate Lady K and Princess Kiku, while Rikimaru and Tatsumaru will rescue Lord Gohda. En route, however, Tatsumaru notices enemy ninjas scaling the castle walls. He tells Rikimaru to continue ahead while he pursues his target. Now's as good a time as any, so spoilers for a 20-year-old game, but Tatsumaru is the third character you unlock to be in the story with both Rikimaru and Ayame. His story acts as a missing piece to the narrative as a whole, giving greater context to the events that 2 characters have only witnessed from their side. I'll do my best to tie it all together later on. As Rikimaru, we begin inside a burning Gohda Castle, our first proper interior location. It's a definite upgrade from the castle level that made an appearance in Stealth Assassins. You'll find yourself navigating a number of hallways, forcing you to utilize your wall-hugging abilities to time stealth kills on unsuspecting guards. Due to the sharp turns and the draw distance, you'll have to rely more heavily on your key meter to place a guard's patrol cycle as you gradually make your way up to the castle's highest floor. The first time through, what always tripped me up was the fact you had to locate a number of doors that required you to slash through them to proceed, so I'd often find myself wandering back and forth for ages until I felt like more of an idiot than usual. At the top of the castle, Rikimaru arrives to find the new Lord Gohda locked in a clash of philosophies and blades. Motohide wishes to rule the land through tyranny, believing the seat of power to be his, while Gohda wishes to guide the land down a more benevolent route. During a brief mocap kerfuffle, Gohda disarms Motohide and has an opportunity to end the rebellion right there. I really like the little flourish they gave to Gohda where his eyes blink. It just adds a little more nuance to the scene, and it parallels a future shot. However, Gohda's compassion nearly costs him his life. Motohide draws a pistol and shoots him. Terrible shot, by the way. And now Rikimaru finally decides to make himself known. Both Rikimaru and Motohide kick off, and it's a much more forgiving battle than Garan. While Motohide can pop off his pistol in battle, you don't even have to reduce his health fully before it's drawn to a close. Before Rikimaru's battle frenzy sees him finish off Motohide, Gohda throws himself in front of his uncle, suffering the blow instead. Motohide goes all Saturday cartoon villain cackling before he dips. Tachibana turns up Lord Gohda's bodyguard, who looked badass, and urges them to flee. Though reluctant to leave his wife and daughter, Rikimaru assures him that Ayame is in the midst of rescuing them. While Tachibana stays to guard the exit, Rikimaru escapes with Gohda into the night. So how is Ayame getting on? While Rikimaru begins inside the castle, Ayame is left outside in the rain. Her mission to locate Lady K and Princess Kiku sees her navigating the castle grounds. You're able to pick up the valuable grenade item during this mission, which, while not as good as something like the flaming arrow for bosses, is valuable in inflicting damage. In terms of level diversity, it offers more than the maze-like nature of Gohda Castle. This level reminds me of that game on Takeshi's Castle where some terrified receptionist from a Zaibatsu has to blindly run through a maze to get out the other side before a visual key demon smothers them. Upon reaching the second floor of one of the buildings, Motohide is in the midst of wrestling Princess Kiku from Lady K, like two people fighting over toilet paper during the pandemic. One of the customers has a sword though. Motohide kills Lady K just as Ayame rushes into the room. Ready to duke it out, Motohide has other ideas as one of Lord Toda's ninja, the guy backing Motohide, fumbles his way into the scene. Genbu, one of Lord Toda's elite ninja, is portrayed as a somewhat lovable oaf, not built for stealth but somehow a shinobi. The name itself basically means black tortoise, who was a god said to rule over the northern heavens. He is one of the 4 symbols of the Chinese constellation, and wouldn't you just know it, there are 4 of them in total. Genbu himself has turtle-like braces on his arms and wields 2 giant metal taiyaki. I don't think that's a joke because taiyaki are modeled or molded on the shape of a red sea breed, known as the king of all fish. Given that it's associated with good fortune and abundance in Japanese culture, and Genbu's a big boy, it makes sense. There's also something to say for the leaf on Genbu's belly button. Known as the hara no uba in Japanese, it's not a literal leaf, but an idea associated with the protection and care of infants. In Genbu's case, it may be because he is, in a sense, quite childlike, and is often in danger as part of the job, like when he challenges a 14-year-old ninja to a fight. Genbu's slow, but he's got a lot of reach, which can be a pain. And he has 300 HP, which is an insane amount for this point in the game. While we obviously won't have to cut through all that fat, you are forced to take him well past halfway until he totally decides to not defeat you and instead pieces out. His exit, however, is not as graceful as he'd like, and Ayame is forced to lend a helping foot up his arse to jettison him out the window and crash into the night. Kind of a bit of an emotional whiplash here, because we're next crouched over the soon-to-be corpse of Lady K. The lady entrusts Ayame with not only a matching pair of lotus-shaped bells, but her daughter's life. The lotus is quite a prominent symbol in Japanese culture, representing purity, enlightenment, particularly in Buddhism. While the true meaning of these bells wouldn't become clear until Wrath of Heaven, they serve as a physical representation of the eventual bond between Ayame and Princess Kiku. As the castle burns in the distance, Gohda laments the loss of it and the symbolic stability of the realm, as well as his own perceived weakness. Rikimaru attempts to offer his sympathies, but is bailed out when Gohda's advisor, Sekiya, appears on horseback. Unfortunately, he brings equally grim tidings. After Motohide's failure to assassinate Gohda, he turned his sights on his family. His wife, Lady K, had been murdered, and his daughter, Princess Kiku, has been kidnapped. Driven to his knees by the news, Sekiya piles some more fuel on the fire with the news that Lord Toda, the one backing Motohide, has led his troops across the border and into Gohda's lands. In no fit state to dispense justice, Rikimaru offers up his blade. Meanwhile, as Ayame kneels over Lady K's corpse, Tatsumaru appears. Saddened and frustrated by Lady K's death, Ayame swears vengeance and pursues Motohide, leading both ninja to Lord Toda's war camp. Taking place on the same night as the assault on Gohda Castle, we catch up with Motohide, Kiku in tow, at Toda Yoshisada's war camp. Along with bigging up his master swordplay in totally wounding his nephew, Motohide beseeches Toda for a few troops to finish Gohda off once and for all. Unfortunately for him, Toda's not really in a giving mood. In fact, he's in a taking mood. Why share the victory of Gohda and the spoils of his land when he can simply have it all? Ayame watches on as Toda slays Motohide and aims to use Kiku as a bargaining chip. But before Ayame can set her sights on reclaiming the princess, she's interrupted by a new face, a ninja in ridiculously skimpy armor that's barely protecting her modesty. The ninja allows Ayame to live and scurry off into the rainy night. This level is much more linear than the previous mission. As Ayame, you begin right behind Toda's Jinmaku. These are the curtains sectioning off a part of the encampment. These offer privacy for meetings, allowed commanders to strategize, and basically just said, I'm special in this little area. From here, Ayame must find Princess Kiku. Because the level is set during the night, the draw distance is deliberately lower in this open area, forcing you to rely more heavily on your key meter and the wet, slapping footfalls of nearby enemies. Here, close to where you start, you'll find a smoke bomb. Unfortunately, I didn't find this item as effective in Birth of the Stealth Assassins. Bosses tend to dislike walking into the area after you just set one off, and it also doesn't provide you with more than a couple of free hits this time around. Similar to the first Gang of Thieves mission, the ground undulates quite a bit. More enemy archers perch atop lookout spots, and you can make use of the tree branches in order to survey the area and get the drop on enemies. Trying to grandmaster this stage can be a bit of a pain because you're systematically doing laps of the space in order to clear everyone out. Objects such as Jinmaku, wooden crates, stacks of logs, and even gradations and land offer plenty of opportunities to take cover before heading in for the kill. However, it is rather short in that you can head straight to the opposite end of where you begin. As you draw closer, the muffled cries of Princess Kiko will alert you to a location, a small shed close to another set of Jinmaku. As Rikimaru, your path through the level is essentially reversed. You're heading for Lord Toda, but when he reaches his destination, someone else is there waiting for him. We are introduced to Suzaku, the Red Sparrow. His name is unfamiliar, but his temperament does feel slightly familiar. One of Toda's ninjas, Suzaku represents the vermilion bird of the south in Chinese mythology, wearing a mask like Genbu. His is more styled on that of a bird, and he wields what I believe is a jian, or shan, I don't know how to pronounce Chinese, a Chinese double-edged straight sword. Rather than allow Rikimaru to go and murder his boss, Suzaku would rather have Rikimaru entertain him. This battle would be the most difficult the player has faced so far. Along with his blade, Suzaku also utilizes some fancy footwork kind of familiar and ninja items such as the smoke bomb. He's aggressive and won't give a player any breathing room in the battle. You can cheese encounters like this by knocking an opponent down, getting around their back, and then just crouch attacking them to death before they have a chance to recover. It may not be honourable, but only samurai concern themselves with a stuffy concept like that. You're not required to totally defeat Suzaku, not yet anyway. He cries off after taking a certain amount of damage, giving the classic line of "You might be worthy to beat me someday," before making a quick exit into the night. Rikimaru rushes in between the Jinmaku to find Motohide dead and Toda equally dead, but 100% more headless. Believing Tatsumaru to be responsible for Toda's death, the sound of battle filters through the rain, with Rikimaru determined to pursue them. Ayame, however, has just located Princess Kiku. The girl cries for her mother, and Ayame offers some comfort by returning her sister bells before introducing herself. Kiku claims her mother made the bells, which may be technically law-breaking, I don't know, but Kiku offers one of the bells to Ayame, saying her mother crafted them, the two of them. Kiku wishes to be reunited with her mother, but Ayame can't quite bring herself to tell Kiku the truth of what's transpired. Lucky for her, just like Rikimaru, the sounds of an altercation grab their attention. It must have been pretty loud. We travel opposite ends of the war camp, but what do I know? Rikimaru and Ayame reunite to discover Tatsumaru and that scantily clad female ninja going at it on a cliff edge, but not like that. Ayame drops off Kiku with Rikimaru, determined to help Tatsumaru. As she approaches the cliff, a classic PS1 era CGI cutscene kicks in. Back in the era of 32-bit graphics, CGI cutscenes were obviously pretty expensive time-wise, but whenever they cropped up in a game, it felt like a little treat for the player. And Tenchu 2's cutscenes go pretty hard. Locked in blades atop the cliff, it begins to crumble under the storm, sending Tatsumaru and the mystery ninja plunging into the ocean below, seemingly dead. All that remains is Tatsumaru's white bandage bobbing on the water's surface. Before we get too far into the throes of Act 2, let's talk about enemies. The things you kill that dispense points, blood, and items. Broadly, there are melee and ranged enemies. The ones you get up close to are often armed with blades, spears, and claws. Ranged wield bows and guns. Much like stealth assassins, enemies move through different alert phases in reaction to the world around them, which your key meter indicates. Blue if they're oblivious, a yellow alert if they're close to noticing you, pink if they're in an alert state, and red if they're engaging you. Enemies and innocents alike will react to things like sounds in the environment and the slain bodies of their comrades. Though there were said to be improvements in enemy AI for Birth of the Stealth Assassins, I always struggle to understand what those were. In the previous game, you were harshly punished for causing a ruckus. You'd basically have to go into a corner for a timeout and wait until everything settled down. But because enemies are rarely in the vicinity of one another, there aren't many opportunities for these protracted chaotic events. Enemies do have, I wouldn't say more complex pathing routes, but they are more organic and sometimes unpredictable. The main enemies you'll be tangling with are soldiers, ninja, and Chinese pirates. In contrast to the first game, that's quite the downgrade in not only enemy variety, but their aesthetic too. Animals are few and far between, and enemy design, though an improvement in terms of modelling, lack visual interest. Take for example the inclusion of wolves in the Kill the Princess mission on Tenchu Stealth Assassins. Wolves could sense the player better than humans, and you were often required to equip yourself with a shuriken if you wanted to get silently and easily by them. Their inclusion changes how you approach a situation. There's very little of that in Birth of the Stealth Assassins. Other factors in the environment rarely alter how you approach taking an enemy out. Also, there's no manji dancers, which is unforgivable. In Stealth Assassins, though enemy models were more primitive, they added greatly to the vibe of the different environments. The enemy ninja models don't even change in Birth of the Stealth Assassins. The ones you fight earlier on are the same as the ones you fight in the final levels, whereas in Stealth Assassins, the ninja you found in Reclaiming the Castle had an upgraded visual design like they'd Pokemon evolved into their next stage. This was also true of the skeletal soldiers in the final assault of Mael's Lair. There was a visual expression of events becoming more dire. I'm speculating when I say a decision to use many of the same assets was done to save development time, and there was a conscious decision to create less visually interesting models due to the engine constraints in those levels. It's the price of going big or going home, though a level where we get a flicker of variety is in Rikimaru's next mission. 3 months have passed since Tatsumaru's death. The rains from that night were able to save Gohda Castle from further destruction, and the Lord himself now convalesces at the Azuma village while his subjects rebuild the castle. Life goes on. We begin a new chapter with Gohda telling Rikimaru of demons abducting residents of a village. It's now his job to investigate. It's in Act 2 where we see the largest deviation in the narrative, with Rikimaru and Ayame following 2 unique plot threads which will eventually intertwine. Upon arriving at the village, a Tengu warrior, who strangely sounds like he's been transported from a 50s gangster movie,
Go ahead and scream! We're in the middle of nowhere!
is harassing a villager before Rikimaru intervenes. As far as badass lines go,
I am the man who will cut off your nose at the neck.
is pretty good. For those that have played Tenchu Stealth Assassins, Demon Mountain is very reminiscent of Cure the Princess. Both locations take place in a mountainous region with sharp increases and decreases in elevation. A large stream flows into a waterfall at the level's midpoint, acting as a divide in the path you can take to reach the summit. This is perhaps the largest level so far. More often than not, you're in a position where the enemy has the high ground, so constantly checking that your route upwards is free of foes. There's also a ton of Tengu peppering the various rocky outcropping mountain bridges. It serves as a nice break from the flatter, take a straight line from point A to point B previous missions. Rikimaru starts at the base of the mountain. The right side is perhaps a little more annoying than heading up from the left, though it's best to swing by the left because you can find the ever useful poison rice item. It's not as OP as it was in Stealth Assassins because you can't really punt it like you used to. Enemies tend to devour this thing in one bite, making it less recyclable than before. Another major factor limiting its usefulness is due to the game's design conceit. Enemies rarely occupy tight spaces and are seldom grouped together, so there's less of an impetus to break a foe's pathing. I'd say something like the poison dart is an item that replaced it for MVP status. Demon Mountain is a bit of an uptick in difficulty. With enemies occupying a higher elevation and with a further field of view during the day, they'll often get a bead on you before you can confirm their location. In these situations, you're relying more on your own eyes than the key meter. Oh yeah, there's also a bear. It'll mess you up. This furball is padding around the maze-like pillars on the level's right-hand path. I remember the first time playing the game, turning a pillar to expect another enemy and find this dude ready to pounce. The bear itself, which I'm assuming is an Ursuri brown bear, is native to Hokkaido. While I don't necessarily think Tenchu is set in this region, maybe those Tengu brought it over. Or just maybe this is a game and they thought it'd be cool to include a bear in the mountain. Who knows, eh? Taking the pillars to your destination, a large hut at the peak of the village, is kind of a pain. More often than not, your grappling hook isn't playing ball and you've over or undershot a jump and plunge like 50 feet to the ground. Swinging around the left, though it contains slightly more enemies, offers an easier route. Regardless of how you reach the hut, you'll arrive to find the villagers just kind of chilling in a circle. They're supposed to be tied up, but they just look like they're playing a terrible game of hide and seek. After freeing the villagers, one of them strikes up a conversation with Rikimaru. Before he's had a chance to say more than a few words, he's cut down by Kamadoma. Though not a member of the rogue ninjas, he's a co-conspirator helping them through abducting villagers. He's named after Kamadoma, the camel cricket. This terrifying looking thing is pretty beefy, and I suppose his kama, those side things, represent the cricket's limbs. Cackling like a madman, Rikimaru's pretty eager to shut his mouth, so naturally it's time to fight. Thankfully, this dude's pretty slow and he's a lot easier to zone so that you can allow him to approach before attacking. Upon defeat, Rikimaru silences him for good with a sword lodged in his trachea. Rikimaru then returns to the dying villager's side, who hands over a map to the Burning Dawn's secret harbour and asks that the ninjas save his people. Ayame, meanwhile, has already made her way to the harbour, Kubon Island, after Lord Gohda informs her of its location. Not terribly excited by the thought of helping people, it's a job at least, and we also get the introduction of Semimaru, the Azuma Ninja Village's dog. Kubon Island is essentially a large circle that Ayame has to skirt around to find an entrance to a hidden dock. As the name suggests, there's a lot of sand, sun, and Chinese pirates waiting for her. At first glance, you may think the island is quite narrow, a location due to the tight ridges along the mountainside, but if you take a dip into the water, you'll discover a bunch of smaller islands scattered around. The majority of these islands are nothing more than a distraction. You can simply swim for a large portion of this mission to reach your destination as quickly as possible. If you do hang around the watery areas, you can pick up the air bottle item, which will replenish your air supply if you swing it while underwater. I'm really struggling to find a practical use for this item outside of maybe Rikimaru's final mission, where for some reason you just decide to not come up for air, I guess. A pretty useless item that is more filler than anything. Upon reaching dry land, you'll circle around the cliff to finally locate the pirate ship holding the slaves. Finding cover, Ayame watches as a procession of captives are led into the heart of the island fort. The Island 4 is similar to Demon Mountain, though without as severe a gradient. Ayami will find the captives at the far end of the level. The Island 4 is one of the better levels in Birth of the Stealth Assassins because it strikes a good balance between environments, watchtowers, houses, bridges, elevated land, and guards within a closer proximity, requiring a little more caution than usual. You will not only be up against Chinese pirates, but Burning Dawn ninjas, dispelling any doubt who's behind the recent spate of kidnappings. I'm not quite sure what the specific level design term is for this, and it's more apparent in games like Wrath of Heaven, Aragami, and Blades of the Shogun, but it's where the level itself is divided into subsections. In the Secret Harbour, you've got the initial area Ayami spawns in, featuring the ship, and you've got initial climb up the rocky beach towards the settlement. Here, you'll find a stream bisecting the area with a small cliff that provides different entry points towards the houses scattered on the incline. There are often ninja patrolling the stream or roaming the rooftops. Then, right at the end, a large portion of excavated land acts as the makeshift prison that you have to carefully navigate downwards. It reminds me of the Azuma Ninja Village, but taken to the extreme. Compared to the general flat level design of previous missions, the Island Fortress simply feels like a more engaging area to explore. But when you're done exploring, there are, people who need rescuing or whatever. Upon freeing the captives, Wang Dahai, head of the Baoliu Sung, probably said that wrong, appears, and it does not look like he is having a good time. So we've got Chinese pirates. The term Wako firstly was used to describe Japanese pirates primarily, and then later became a catch-all term for East Asian pirates in general. Without unpacking too much here, because there is a lot, let's just start with the kanji. Wako. The wa we see here is an older historical term used for Japan and its people. Ko is an enemy, so Japanese enemy. Wa would eventually give way to wa, such as in washoku, Japanese food broadly. Given that Tenchu takes place during the 1600s to 17th century, this was at a time when piracy from everyone around that region was pretty high. While the game does not explicitly say how the Burning Dawn came into contact with the pirates in order to contract them into kidnapping people, it's not too far-fetched to believe that, being ninjas and all, they have a few contacts in the criminal underworld. However, one member in particular has a stronger connection to these pirates than others, but we'll get to that later. Baoliu Sun is pretty obviously a Chinese name. I do not know where to begin in trying to translate this. If you stick it into Google Translate, it spits out embracing the Sun Party. Like, some of the kanji obviously carry over to Japanese, but then you'd get something like embracing your grandchild group, which is obviously an awful translation. Anyway, pirate's bad, you've got to kill him. The fight with Elder Wang, because he has a son, would be a lot worse if we were in close quarters. However, jagged land doesn't really make for an easy battleground. Wang's attacks don't possess too much range, though he does have a cool pair of glasses and what looks to be a Bahshua Dao Chinese scimitar. Again, no idea how to say it. With the father finished off with Ayami's sass, she's 14, remember, Genbu, now the Green Titan, makes another appearance. It's here where Kagami's name first reaches Ayami's ears. Genbu extends an invitation to Ayami, claiming Lady Kagami is building a new world for only ninja. After Ayami's refusal and Genbu's poor transformation into a rock, he flees with a little more grace than before. For the Secret Harbour, the fort is nested within Kubon Island itself, and the island's cliffs offer a natural fortification. Rikimaru learned of its existence from one of the dying villagers at the mountain village, who handed over a map to the Burning Dawn Secret Harbour and asked that the ninja save his people. He arrives in the dead of night to find the harbour overrun with Chinese pirates. Starting from a rocky area with enemies dotted at various elevations, you'll cross over a beach laden with explosives to a Chinese junk anchored close by. The tight pathways between the rocks force you to be a little more cautious because you never know who's waiting for you around the corner, but generally, sticking to the high ground is enough to get by. The beach area, however, is pretty trivial. Because of the game's tendency to have to fill a large area with enemies, they are all spaced out quite far, and because you can essentially approach them from any angle, it's easy enough to just simply pick them off. If we look back to a Reach the Ship mission from Tenchu 1, Destroy the Foreign Pirates, despite your ability to just scoot straight to the finish line, the level itself was more compelling because of the tight alleyways and more challenging enemy positions. When you reach the junk, Rikimaru heads into the hold to find the captive, along with the son of Wang Dahai, Wang Zhaohai. You've got a kind of existential translation crisis going on with Wang's dialogue here. The broken English is supposed to convey that Wang's speaking in broken Japanese, but instead it veers off into that slightly racist caricature of someone slightly Asian sounding doing a bad Chinese accent.
Rude person. In China, guests not leave without thanking hosts.
In the Japanese, Wang says,
礼儀知らない客あるね。
which is basically saying that Rikimaru is an unmannered or uninvited guest. Then Rikimaru tells him that he'll teach him the country's etiquette, throat stabbing. In that clip, you can also see the improved graphical fidelity of Wang's model too. So you beat off Wang in this small space, which is an absolute pain because the dude will constantly get behind you and then proceed to stun lock you for the rest of the short fight. If you do manage to survive, you'll leave Wang in a bloody heap, off to join his father. As Rikimaru stands over his fresh kill, someone gets the drop on him. Though it was a surprise the first time playing the game, it doesn't take a genius to see through who this interloper is, or was, Tatsumaru. Now, Seiryu, the blue dragon, he still wields Izayoi, though appears to not know who he is. After Rikimaru's attempts to get through to him fails, Seiryu then jumps clean through the deck, I guess. Having come away with more questions than answers, Rikimaru returns to the Azuma village. Colonel Campbell, Master Shunsai, listens to Rikimaru's reported sightings of Tatsumaru, believing that the ninja has been deceived. Amnesia or no, Tatsumaru's actions have brought shame to the Azuma clan, and Shunsai declares that only death can wash those sins away. Gohda pops his head in for a moment later to inform them that a temple has been taken over by the Burning Dawn. While their presence is news to him, Rikimaru's already encountered them, so has no choice but to investigate. Out of all of Birth of the Stealth Assassin's missions, the Temple of Dreams certainly has the best vibe. There's just something about snowfall and night that really leans into the ninja aesthetic. Speaking of vibes, let's head off the beaten path and talk about Birth of the Stealth Assassin's aesthetics. What made the original game interesting to reflect on was that each level had a strong sense of place. They felt like the amalgamations of historical scenes recreated in janky polygons, the architecture, cultural flourishes, and characters all layered together to create a pulpy representation of this warring ninja world. Level design was a powerful ingredient in that cosmic gumbo. One of the mentioned drawbacks of larger environments is that there's only so much stuff you can place in them before the PlayStation or any piece of hardware starts chugging. Birth of the Stealth Assassins forgoes the vibe of the first game in order to cater to a larger play area. When playing, I often wondered how some of these levels would have been represented if they were part of the original game. There are flourishes of aesthetically powerful and interesting missions in the game, whether that's the Azuma Village, Cherry Tree Hill, the Island Fort, or In Pursuit of Tatsumaru's Bamboo Grove. However, when you stop and smell the pixelated flowers, levels lack that extra care in building variety, clutter, and design flourishes that made Stealth Assassin so memorable. With Endo's intention of bringing the game to the PS2, I can only wonder how the presentation of Birth of the Stealth Assassins would have manifested. As it is now, a lot of levels just feel lacking. Buildings and environments just transform into vertices in the environment rather than a cohesive space. It feels empty, like a frontier in the Old West that's yet to be fully settled. Areas in the game where this is partially remedied and reclaimed are the places we were talking about before, the Azuma Village and the Island Fort, to name a few. And what do they all have in common? The environments are smaller, they have more personality, and talking about the missions in more detail becomes increasingly difficult because there's literally less to talk about, less character, fewer interesting ideas and flourishes. It's as if Acquire had too little paint to properly cover their canvas. But back to the temple. Rikimaru arrives in the dark to find it overrun by Burning Dawn ninja with no clear reason as to why it's being targeted. Your mission here is to locate the no stage within the temple's inner sanctum. It's easy to treat this level as simply a straight line through the temple grounds itself. However, you can actually stray off the beaten path and into the freezing waters surrounding the temple. Ninja patrol the hallways, often doing the rounds on bridges connecting each section or roving the floorboards, though very few of their patrols intersect. If you dive into the waters off to the left and swim to the little temple there, you can dive underwater to obtain one of the best ninja tools in the game, the blowgun. On an unsuspecting enemy, this thing is a one-hit KO and it's got a fair bit of range on it. You have to adjust the angle of the reticule because the little dart has quite the arc to it, but it's pretty satisfying pulling off a long shot on some unsuspecting enemy like an Olympic archer. Whether you approach by sea or land, when you reach the nose stage, you'll find Yuki Hotaru, meaning Yuki meaning snow and Hotaru being a firefly, so snow, ice, firefly. Pretty fitting given the circumstances. No or No Theatre is a classic dance drama. A lot of people have probably seen what this is but may not know the specific name for it. At the stage area where these performances were held, the Nogakudo, it's not just Yuki Hotaru waiting for us, but Suzaku's up for a performance of his own. Yuki Hotaru offers to kill us on her lover's behalf, but you can imagine how that goes. In the fight with her, you at least have a bit of space to shift around if needed, and her tanto doesn't really allow her too much range in battle. An improvement over Wang definitely, though a little underwhelming. As Yuki Hotaru lays dying, her final request is that Suzaku embraces her, so he does, with cold steel. There's a lot of nice direction in this scene, in particular how the camera tracks the fireflies during Suzaku's monologue. This serves as the main info dump on the Burning Dawn's motivations. Rikimaru still believes that Tatsumaru hasn't truly gone over to the other side and is actually helping them bring the land into a new age of ninja to replace the dying breeds of samurai, of course, but because this is Suzaku we're talking about here, you've got the classic trope of, you know hero, we're a lot alike you and I, which has served as a running theme throughout the two in the series. Suzaku claims that they both revel in the death of others and the carnage of battle, So far, Rikimaru as a character has been more gung-ho and a little reckless in his relentless commitment to the Azuma ninja. Suzaku's there to act as foreshadowing, a figure walking a similar path in the distance that he's catching up to with every kill. Suzaku parts with some ominous words before fleeing into the night once again. As Rikimaru sets off in pursuit, the ninja pigeon flaps down to deliver a message. The village is under attack. However, just before the assault on the ninja village, when Ayame returned after freeing the captives from the secret harbour, Lord Gohda tells her of a quarantine village under attack. This place was created with the intention of sequestering those with contagious diseases from the rest of the land, but for some reason, it's now overrun by the Burning Dawn. The mission is a lot more reminiscent of Tenchu Stealth Assassins in that it's quite a restrained level. A series of huts comprise the majority of the area, and ninja roam both the dirt roads and rooftops. There's also the odd disorientated and emaciated villager hobbling about. It's also where you'll finally find the smoke bomb. While not quite as OP as it was in the original, it does afford you a short reprieve to heal or get in an attack. Like most occasions where you have an opening in Birth of Stealth Assassins, you want to go for a crouching attack to output the most damage as possible. Compared to Ayame's previous mission, the quarantine village is pretty snappy, with you being able to skirt around the right side to reach a set of stairs leading up to a torii gate. Here, Ayame finds Tatsumaru and Lady Kagami in an embrace. Villagers filled with the infirm tend to get the heart racing. Ayame hides for a moment only for Kagami to launch herself into the air and vanish. Ayame bolts up the stairs to confront Tatsumaru. Much like his conversation with Rikimaru, Tatsumaru ghosts Ayame, reaffirming that he is Seiru, the Blue Dragon. Unwilling to carry on the conversation despite her pleas, he ultimately dips when three creatures turn up: the snake, the frog, and the slug. Before they can give a proper introduction, Ayame lunges at them and we're in a 3-on-1 fight. Don't let the fact that they have around 50 health give you a false sense of security. The area is small and those chimera are pretty relentless. You'd better hope you brought some bombs along for the ride. Rather than take them on one by one, you're better off grouping them up and then letting rip with what ninja tools you've got. Thankfully, it's easier to get them stuck behind scenery in the little arena and then focus them down one by one until you're victorious. With Tatsumaru nowhere to be found, the ninja pigeon makes a return, bringing the same tidings as it did to Rikimaru. The village is under attack. Rikimaru arrives at the ninja village to find Kagami busy folding some octogenarian ninja. How the Azuma ninja have no one middle-aged is probably their best guarded secret. This is Rikimaru's first proper encounter with the leader of the Burning Dawn. As he stands around the fresh corpses of his neighbours, Kagami's busy spouting off rhetoric about her plans to transform the land into a place solely for ninja, regardless if it is built on the foundation of thousands of innocent lives. All that oppose Kagami will suffer the same fate. Why Kagami doesn't challenge Rikimaru right then and there, I don't know, but he next rushes towards Master Shunsai's hut to find the man himself and Lord Gohda locked in their own buddy ninja film. Shunsai gives you a simple mission: eliminate the enemy ninja. Elimination missions are quite rare in Birth of the Stealth Assassins and in some ways kind of redundant. To get a Grandmaster rating, you're basically required to turn every outing into one of these anyway. What I like most about this mission is the setup and payoff. When we started the game, where we trained, our home has now been transformed into a battlefield. The flipped context reminds me a lot of Hitman 2, where you first begin at the church and then at the end of the game are fending off intruders. What makes it so effective is that you familiarize yourself with this location by osmosis as you go through training and generally roam about. Now's the time to dredge up those memories and use them to your advantage to navigate the village and eliminate your foes. Likewise, whereas you first began at the lowest point in the village, you now start at its peak and must systematically work your way through the area to locate every enemy as the village burns. Kagami's ninja have positioned themselves at top huts, in guard towers, in the bamboo grove, and even have the temerity to take over the onsen, the bastards. Again, everyone's spaced out so they're easy enough to dispatch, though you may often get baited into nearly assassinating some old ninja dude pottering about. The key meter also makes it slightly difficult to ensure you've hunted every enemy down, because you'll follow its signal to find Oji-san on patrol. Regardless of where you assassinate the final enemy, once it's done, the mission's complete, and as Rikimaru dashes around, a blood-curdling scream alerts him to Master Shunsai's hut. Upon entering, he finds Master Shunsai dead on the floor, with Tatsumaru standing over him. Unlike the previous encounters, Rikimaru is not wasting his breath on trying to reason with his former clan brother, and instead kicks things off. The battle with Tatsumaru is actually one of the more even encounters in the game because he technically has as broad a moveset as you do. Not to mention, fists don't sport quite the same range as a blade. Despite the confined space, Rikimaru can make quick work of him, but it'll take more than a depleted health bar to truly finish him off. What follows is, as far as Rikimaru's arc goes, one of the most important scenes of Birth of the Stealth Assassins. After overpowering Tatsumaru and forcing him to spill to the floor, Rikimaru's poised with the blade over his head. We even see that Lord Gohda's chilling against the wall too, but Rikimaru can't bring himself to do it. Mirroring Gohda's encounter with his uncle Motohide way back in the castle, this is where the path that may lead him to Suzaku diverts. Like Gohda, Rikimaru is a servant of the people, which means being able to temper his vengeance. And like Motohide, Tatsumaru sees this opening and attacks, drawing Izuyoi across Rikimaru's eye, giving him that iconic scar. Before the two can go at it again, Kagami opens the door with an old man-sized lockpick. Despite Rikimaru's enthusiasm, Kagami easily holds him back, but she does impart some final words: "Get good," or thereabouts. "Conquer his weakness, become a more worthy opponent for me," the usual spiel. Kagami and Tatsumaru flee, leaving Rikimaru to kneel over his dying master just as Ayame arrives at the village. After witnessing the death and destruction of the burning dawn of Raw, she immediately pursues Tatsumaru and Kagami. Shunsai implores Rikimaru to reclaim Izuyoi and seek out their enemies not in the name of revenge, but justice. As Rikimaru is now the de facto head of the Azuma Ninja, which consists of literally 2 teenagers and a dog, but promotion's still a promotion, Lord Gohda finally wakes up from his nap, determined to regroup at his castle before launching one final assault. As his first order of business, Rikimaru instructs Semimaru to locate Tatsumaru through his scent. Would this have worked for a normal Akita or Shiba? No. But for Semimaru? Also no. But it's a game, so why not? The dynamic duo leave the smouldering ashes of the Azuma village and their previous life behind and start to bring an end to the game. However, Ayame is doing a better job of tracking down Tatsumaru than little Semimaru. Arriving at a hilly area marked with an ancient sakura tree amongst an army of smaller plant life and ninja, she's determined to knock some sense into Tatsumaru. The mission has slightly similar vibes to Rikimaru's hunt for the secret harbour. Undulating hills and hillocks obscure enemies patrolling at various elevations. The uneven ground has a tendency to make stealth kills a pain because the game can't seem to reconcile you not being on the same gradient as a foe. Stealth kills often simply won't work, so you're best sticking to having your weapon drawn before every kill. From a visual level, we've exchanged falling snow for sakura petals which litter the ground and drift in streams. Thematically, the sakura itself symbolizes a number of things that resonate with both of the stealth assassin's characters. The bloom of the tree itself is usually fleeting, symbolizing the impermanence of life, a character's childhood innocence. For Ayame, this level marks a turning point in burying her memories of Tatsumaru and accepting that, regardless of his potentially returning memories, his actions can't be excused. There's the term mono no aware, though succinct, packs a ton of meaning. If we were to attempt to sum it up and just kind of strip it of its beauty, we can say it's the acknowledgement on an emotional level of the transience of life, and what symbolizes this for our characters more than the bloom of the sakura. As Ayame wends around the mountain and tracks up the hill, she finds Tatsumaru and Kagami standing beneath the giant cherry blossom tree. Both Kagami and Ayame have some choice words to exchange with each other before Tatsumaru breaks it up. His cooler head prevails and he convinces Kagami to leave Ayame to him instead. In a slight change of pace, instead of leaping into the air, Kagami just jogs off. And it is at this moment we finally get to hear some of Noriyuki's composition, which was sorely missing from the entire game. Strings swell as Ayame implores Tatsumaru to remember his past, stirring memories of the two of them under this very same sakura. It turns out to be the key to unlocking his forgotten memories, though he's still unwilling to open himself up to the thought of returning. He leaves Ayame with one final warning. Next time they meet, one of them will end up dead. Rikimaru and Semimaru find Ayame slumped by the trunk of the great tree. He's hellbent on bringing Tatsumaru to justice himself, but Ayame's having none of it. If it's going to be someone, it's her. So the three of them continue their pursuit. Semimaru leads the two ninja to a thick bamboo grove before bolting off into the night. It's here that both ninjas' paths converge and continue along the same trajectory for the rest of the game. This mission is a lot of fun, thanks to the tight bunches of bamboo creating natural walls and roots throughout the level. Like any anime convention, it is one of the most trap-laden environments that you will find. There are noise-making traps along the floor's floor and they're positioned to catch you out around corners. The game also loves to have explosive mounds choking the narrow roots through walls of bamboo, and sporadic elevation allows you to either get the drop on, or whatever the opposite of the drop is, on enemies. In Pursuit of Tatsumaru feels like an expansion of the final section of Cross the Checkpoint, from stealth assassins, lifting some of the terrain choices and general vibe of the level and expanding on them. Whether you're playing as Rikimaru or Ayame, there's no material difference in the section aside from the boss you'll face at the end of the level. This is perhaps one of the most frustrating boss encounters of the game. If you are Rikimaru, you'll have Byako, the white tiger of the Burning Dawn. He looks like someone straight out of a 70s kung fu film. His tiger is something straight out of a Siegfried and Roy show. While the little man himself isn't too much of a bother, his stick has poor range, his tiger is a different story. Byako goes down with explosive encouragement or by simply hacking away. Chiro, the tiger, is infinitely more of a pain in the ass. Ayame has poor range with the weapons. A tiger and his big old paws have a lot of range, and this thing can leap too. And it has 200 health. If you don't come into this fight stocked up on bombs or fire arrows, you're gonna have a bad time. When this tiger leaps at you and you block, it'll end up getting behind you and then attack. When you attack, you'll push past it, and then it's chomping on your exposed leg. It is an absolutely ridiculous battle, baffling. The death screen hits hard though. In the end, Semimaru offers a helping set of jaws to finish it off. Once you've somehow gotten past the beast, the dog leads the two into the Kansen Caverns, still on the scent of Tatsumaru. Again, there's no difference in approach aside from enemy layout between Rikimaru or Ayame. Your destination is a huge ship moored in an underground harbour at the other side of the caverns. Being a cave, there are multiple branching pathways you can take to reach your goal, though it's broadly broken up between the waterfall path to the right at the level start or the cavern path. The former gives you a little more of a breather between enemy encounters, while the latter allows you to pick up the blinding dust item. As you can imagine, this is simply a more targeted version of the smoke bomb, and only really comes into play against bosses. Being a secret base and all, there are traps galore. The mines seem to be a favourite of the Burning Dawn, going so far as they litter one hallway with them completely. Enemies have very little regard for their own lives and will happily bomb through this area when in caution or an attacking state and just blow themselves up. Another positive of the mission is that because all the enemies are ninja, they have a ton of items on them, with the blowgun being the most useful of the bunch. It's also a level in which the game tries to include a little more challenge to enemy patrols intersecting, particularly around the midpoint. When you reach the end, Rikimaru and Ayame hide behind stacked crates to eavesdrop on Kagami and Tatsumaru as she heralds the completion of their warship as a major step in realizing their goal of a world ruled by ninja, free to choose how they live and die. Her monologue's interrupted by one of her minions alerting her to an intruder's presence. That is you.
Stop shouting!
We're treated to another musical sting courtesy of Noriyuki as Kagami proclaims their first target to be Gohda Castle as revenge against the lords, using ninja as instruments of warfare and nothing more. Unleashed from its mooring, the fire demon blasts a hole clean through the mountain, pretty impressive. With time running out, Rikimaru decides to warn Lord Gohda of the fire demon's approach, while Ayame sneaks on board, bringing a close to Act 2. There's no elegant way to segue into a discussion of items, but we need to say something about them because there are just so many. In theory, your arsenal of ninja tools are meant to afford you more options to dispatch your enemy or gain some kind of advantage over them. Birth of the Stealth Assassins attempts to foster a sense of emergent gameplay through its items. In what interesting ways can I face a problem with what I have on hand? The problem is the game's level design is fundamentally against this. We can broadly split the game's items into three categories: support, stealth, and attack. Support items help your survival in general. Stealth makes slipping by undetected or dispatching an enemy silently easier. Attack items you'd straight up use in combat situations. Support covers items like the health potion, armor, airball, and the poison antidote. Stealth would be the chameleon spell, sleeping gas, poison rice blow dart, decoy whistle. Attack is just everything else that's highlighted. Now, let's look at a ninja's hierarchy of options when confronted with a problem. If it's an enemy, you can avoid or attack them. Avoiding an enemy is the most difficult option if they are literally in your way. Fighting the enemy is the next difficult approach. Engaging an enemy with no items is the third most difficult approach. Using an item to dispatch an enemy is the least difficult. Let's imagine a scenario indicative to Birth of the Stealth Assassins. I approach an enemy who is, more often than not, situated in an open space. This is not just reserved for the beginning levels, but follows into later missions like aboard the Burning Dawn ship. What options do I have? More often than not, I can skirt around the enemy or wait for them to turn around. Gone are tight paths through narrow environments or worrying about enemy sightlines. You even have the ability to drag bodies in the game, but enemies are spaced so far apart, outside of a few instances, it's mostly redundant. The most useful stealth item for dealing with an enemy is the blowgun. It slaps, or rather it stings. The chameleon spell is nowhere near as useful this time around because that item was key in dodging areas thick with enemies or getting the drop on an enemy in a tricky position. Now, because they're again spaced so far apart, it has limited uses. The sleeping gas? You'd have to get close enough to use it, so why bother? The level design doesn't offer the opportunities to exploit the tools you have. If you're close enough to go in for the stealth kill, why would you waste a precious resource? If we look at attack items, it's more of a question of which have the highest player value proposition. If my objective is to cause damage while being as far away from the enemy as possible, then the exploding arrow is the obvious choice. Shurikens have their use severely limited because of the lack of animals present. The use of the Semimaru dog bone is a wasted slot. I could go on and on. It may seem a harsh critique. I had the same thoughts on Stealth Assassins, but instead of fundamentally evaluating why and when a player might use these items, the approach just seemed to be add more. Emergent use of items and systems needs a fertile design bed in which to grow, and Birth of the Stealth Assassins feels like a barren desert. Now, back to the scheduled program. After Rikimaru uses a scroll of godlike speed to return to Lord Gohda, the man himself gathers his war council. A ground assault seems impossible, and engaging by sea is equally as dangerous. At stalemate, a decision is soon made for them when the fire demon appears and blows a hole clean through his castle. Gohda steels himself for a sea battle, while Rikimaru vows to infiltrate the vessel and return with Kagami's head. In terms of level length, Ayame gets the shorter end of the stick in Birth of the Stealth Assassins, though it's no less narratively impactful. As she watches Gohda Castle burn for the second time, Ayame vows to protect Princess Kiku and rushes to confront Tatsumaru. This mission plays out in the bowels of the Fire Demon. It sort of functions like Rikimaru's stint in Gohda Castle, but with much wider interior spaces, giving you the height advantage thanks to large crates stacked several feet high. The multi-tiered nature of the ship also offers several opportunities to zip up to other sections where you'll find enemy patrols. A nightmare for anyone hoping to shift stuff around this beast of a ship, but it works for us. The diversity in elevation and exploring all the nooks and crannies makes for a good level and does a great job of conveying the sheer scale of the Fire Demon from within. There's even a pair of Agyo or Kongo Rikishi decorating one section of the ship. These statues, often located at the entrance of Buddhist shrines, act as guardians, and if I were in one big ship trying to overthrow the government, I would take all the help that I could get. However, Ayame is the one in need of a little otherworldly protection, because upon reaching the mission's midpoint, she'll run into Genbu for one final time. Her attempts to reason with him soon fail. Kagami offers Genbu the validation he's been searching for, whereas Ayame fights to protect Gohda's land and its people. While Genbu has a boatload of HP, 300, his attacks and movement are equally slow, offering you multiple openings to attack yourself. Still, the battle's an absolute slog nonetheless, so you really want to expedite it with as many explosions as possible. Finally defeated, Genbu promptly transforms into a statue. Much like those that adorn the ship, as guardians, they ultimately proved useless. Now Ayame's final mission is to confront Tatsumaru. But before that, Rikimaru's due a little dip in the ocean in one of Birth of the Stealth Assassin's most unique missions. The sea battle is essentially an extended platforming section featuring a number of different side vessels bombing on the water. If you choose, you can simply swim straight towards your ultimate destination, a large ship at the other end of the level. You'll be missing a ton of enemies along the way, however, and despite these boats featuring both Gohda's and the Burning Dawn's warriors, they very rarely engage each other in combat. Then their version of naval warfare seems to be obliviously pacing back and forth on the deck. This level is wherever you make it. You can use the grappling hook to get onto ships and take out the ninja one or two at a time. Aside from buffering your score to get a Grandmaster rating or pilfering loot, you've no real incentive to engage with them, but it's always fun to slide through the waters like a ninja shark, only to spring up and skewer an enemy before the game cuts the animation short. However, reflecting on it now, with these types of open levels, Birth of the Stealth Assassins really could have done with some sub-objectives to give the player further incentive to poke around and offer another way to increase their score without slaughtering everyone. I don't really like retroactive game design, but let's say on a level like this, you had to plant explosives on key ships or help take down someone manning a cannon or something. It breathed a lot of life into the missions. When you've had your fill of dispatching Burning Dawn forces, there's one more order of business awaiting Rikimaru before he can separate Kagami's head from his shoulders, and that person is waiting for you on deck. Of course, it's Suzaku, busy reveling in the death and destruction the burgeoning war has wrought. After espousing a few choice words about how awesome murder is, Rikimaru is content to let his blade do the talking, just as he was back in Lord Toda's war camp, and similar to Tatsumaru, Suzaku's one of those specific types of boss battles where it's essentially a mirror image. He has the same ninja tools and moves as you, and he's not afraid to spam them. You're constantly playing a game of footsie, like this is Street Fighter or something, and when Suzaku pulls off a chain series of hits, it'll end up pushing past your guard, like all opponents. Effectively rinsing the crouching slash is your best bet, and if you watch a lot of playthroughs of the game, you'll often find runners using and abusing this move. Once Suzaku's finally down, you've not succeeded in shutting him up just yet. We get a little "those who stare into the abyss" from Suzaku, suggesting that the more people we kill and we've racked up a fair few, the more twisted we'll become. However, through this journey, Rikimaru's severed himself from the idea of vengeance and fully committed himself to being one of Gohda's weapons, the very antithesis of what Kagami is fighting for. After leaving Suzaku to grow cold, Rikimaru finally infiltrates the Fire Demon itself. This is a truly giant craft which looks more like one central ship buoyed by two relatively smaller vessels on either side. Would this thing truly be seaworthy? Couldn't tell you, but it floats in game and packs some serious firepower. Parts of the level almost feel like a little encampment in itself, with roofs to grapple up towards and little alleys created in the shadow of taller structures. It's a better example of the game populating such vast levels with some more challenging enemy placements, particularly those found around the central area, but again, that's really not saying much. I understand the scale they're going for because the Fire Demon has to be this floating fortress. However, from a design perspective, it's simply too vast a location to get much real value out of. Enemies have to function in these little pockets, so you're clearing them out like the overworld of a Ubisoft game. Though there's no direct indication of where you have to go, it's on the opposite ship from where you began your infiltration. At the bow of the ship, you'll not find Kagami, however. Turns out that it's the ship that Ayame had recently infiltrated. She emerges on deck to find Tatsumaru standing before her, An interesting little detail that I noticed is that during these significant portions after the assault on Gohda Castle, scenes are framed with the burning castle in the background. Does it signify those final bonds being seared away? Who knows? Looks nice though. Unlike when Rikimaru fought Tatsumaru and had the advantage of range, this isn't the case with Ayame. Her abysmal reach versus Tatsumaru's long limbs make this fight a bit more of a chore if you've not weighed yourself down with explosive items. Fortunately, because he's playing with the same rules that you are, protracted attacks leave you vulnerable, you're able to slip past his guard. When faced with landing the final blow, much like Rikimaru, Ayame hesitates. Tatsumaru, however, does not. Izayoi pierces his chest. The only fate awaiting traitors is death. Rikimaru arrives to find Ayame standing over Tatsumaru and in this moment earns the Azuma clan's blade, before silently rushing off to find Kagami. Overcome with grief, Ayame throws herself off the ship and into the dark waters. Noriyuki's sparse soundtrack ignites again when Rikimaru reflects on the path that led him to Kagami, who is performing a full-on no routine replete with a get-up on the ship's stage. After a brief exchange of words, it's time to put an end to Kagami's dream once and for all. And what a way to go out, a super annoying boss battle. It comes in two stages. The first, Kagami fights you with a fan, which isn't too troublesome because it lacks range and a powerful attack string. However, upon reaching a health threshold, Kagami will toss the fan away in favour of her blade. Alongside this, she has the ability to launch a poison dart. It's not so much the tick damage that's the problem, it's the convulsions every time your health depletes, leaving you open to attack. Of course, you're going to get stuck in a loop of running away to heal, but bosses are always faster than you and invariably catch up and rinse half your health bar if you're lucky. I would have been and probably was extremely pissed as a kid after coming this far, only to get bodied by Kagami and have to go through the entire final level again. Your best bet is stocking up on explosives like any boss battle in the game and have a good reserve of healing potions. Though you may mortally wound Kagami, she's confident her dream will never die, claiming Rikimaru is nothing more than a puppet mindlessly following orders. This isn't helped by the fact that when you return to Gohda, he asks, is everything taken care of? Like you've just gone out and ordered lunch for everyone rather than torn through dozens of enemies to assassinate their leader. Rikimaru also answers, yes sir, which seems like a strange localization decision. In the Japanese, he simply gives a grunt of affirmation. Gohda asks after Ayame, who's nowhere to be found. His troops fire a volley of arrows to finally send the Burning Dawn's dream sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Amongst that wreckage, we find Ayame lying on flotsam, her grief pushing her towards following Master Shunsai and Tatsumaru. Clutching her chest, she finds the sister bells that were entrusted to her by Lady K, and in their sound, Ayame finds the strength to carry on. Good luck swimming back to shore. We then flash forward to Tatsumaru's grave, where Ayame places some flowers before proclaiming that she'll become strong enough to protect what she cares about. Rikimaru, however, is a little more utilitarian in his answer. He lives to serve as Lord Gohda's shadow. And with that, we've reached the end of Birth of the Stealth Assassin. Kind of. The developers were somewhat coy with revealing the game's third playable character, Tatsumaru, who you can only unlock after completing the story modes for Rikimaru and Ayame. His story serves to fill in the narrative blanks and offer context on not just his side of events, but the Burning Dawns. Though he has fewer missions than Rikimaru or Ayame, the general design philosophy is that through having graduated ninja school via the other characters, this is you out in the real ninja world. Though on the whole, missions are more varied and I cranked up the difficulty to hard, the very nature of the game limits its innate difficulty. As far as playing as Tatsumaru goes, he's by far my favourite character. Possessed of some of the slickest stealth kills in the game, which give off a vibe of this ain't my first rodeo, he exudes an air of capability. Even the ability for him to constantly run without a need to sheath a weapon adds to this. He's like Kiryu. Fists are the ultimate weapon. Ultimately, Tatsumaru feels like an upgrade, but not to a degree where it feels too gimmicky. The entire point of leaving Tatsumaru until now was to revisit those instances in the main narrative, fill in the blanks, and offer some shades of grey to all that black and white. There's no training for Tatsumaru, but we are treated to a significant scene that sees Master Shunsai hand off Izayoi, and with it the future of the Azuma ninja. We then flash forward to the night Gohda Castle was under siege. As he and Rikimaru rush to find Lord Gohda, Tatsumaru becomes distracted by an enemy ninja scaling the castle walls. His mission, Shadow, mixes the exterior location of Ayame's level with a little of the verticality in Rikimaru's jaunt through the castle, and is a much better experience for it. The mission sees you working your way upwards towards where that enemy ninja was heading. The level itself is quite expansive, with enemies peppered about, but unfortunately it's the level that could have really done with a heavier saturation of them. More often than not, you're getting in your cardio from one area to the next. Still, having a playground to test drive Tatsumaru out could have well been a developer intention for the mission, as Shadow's suggestion of searching for answers in high places refers to scaling the largest building in the area. Upon grappling up, we find a familiar figure working through a no performance atop the roof. If you just dove into Tatsumaru's story after completing Rikimaru's, it's a nice display of narrative bookending. Kagami danced at the end of Rikimaru's tale, but her dance marks the beginning of Tatsumaru's. His years of ninja training and dedication allow him to somehow divine that Kagami is a woman and the leader of the Nyogetsu ninja, the only time they're referred to as such. Apparently there's been some long-standing rivalry between them and, by extension, Lord Toda and the Azuma Gohda. It's in this scene that Kagami lays out her central goal. Ninja should be the masters of their own fates. Kagami claims that a union between her ninja and the Azuma would be unstoppable. A clan consisting of a dozen old-age pensioners, 3 fledgling ninja, and a dog would somehow tip the scales in their favour. I mean, maybe Semimaru really pumps those numbers up, I don't know. It's also here that Kagami articulates Birth of the Stealth Assassin's theme. What do you fight for? Your dream? Your lord? Those you hold dear? The chaos? And if you don't know yet, will you strive to discover it? Rather than deal with him herself, Kagami seeks Seiryu, the blue dragon, on Tatsumaru. Armed with a sickle and weighted chain, he represents the Azure Dragon in the Chinese constellation. Like we had with Genbu and Suzaku, he is one of the 4 lords of the Burning Dawn, though he's still known as one of the Nyogetsu here. The battle with Seiryu is kind of annoying because we're on an uneven surface. You'll be going through your attack string, and because you're on a slant, it'll just end up missing the rest of the combo a lot of the time. One unfortunate aspect is that you can't knock the guy off the ledge. That's reserved for when Tatsumaru delivers the killing blow in a cutscene. With Seiryu having become a piece of abstract art on the tiles below, Tatsumaru infiltrates Gohda Castle to find Ayami kneeling by the body of Lady K, which was Lord Motohide's handiwork. Having kidnapped Princess Kiku, Ayami rushes off to find her, but Tatsumaru still has a job to do. Amongst the burning wreckage of the castle, he encounters Sekiya, Lord Gohda's retainer. The Swordmaster Jubei appears to inform them that Motohide's troops are massing nearby, and Sekiya puts the pieces together to determine that Gohda's being betrayed. Having allied with Toda, Tatsumaru vows to bring Sekiya his head. There's little to say about this mission as it is, aside from enemy placement, the same map that was used in both Rikimaru and Ayami's missions. When Tatsumaru reaches the heart of the war encampment, he learns that Motohide has already been slain, something we have to thank Lord Toda for, and that we were privy to in Ayami's side of events. If she'd stayed a little longer instead of rushing off to find Kiku, Ayami would have seen Tatsumaru's arrival. Instead of silently assassinating Toda, like a ninja would, he instead announces himself first. This results in Toda getting backup in the form of a spearman and a bowman. If this fight wasn't bad enough by being in such an enclosed space, we've now got 3 enemies to dispatch. In short, it's a pain. Of course, you're going to want to target the soldiers first, but that leaves you open for everyone to get a free shot in. And you can forget about trying to heal with others hounding you. It's just a horribly thought out battle to say the least. You are absolutely going to need some ninja tools to give you the upper hand. You may recall when Rikimaru entered the war camp, he found Toda's head independent of his body, a clean cut from his Zayoi. Not quite. In reality, Kagami was the executioner, literally and figuratively severing the bond between herself and her master. With his severed, blocky head in hand, Kagami rushes to a nearby cliff edge, sets the head alight, and then tosses it into the waters below. It goes hard. The flame may appear a little extra, but it actually served as a signal to her troops stationed close by. Kagami proclaims this as the birth of the Burning Dawn. After extending one final invite to Tatsumaru, who still refuses, the two fight. And I hope you brought some health potions because this could come as a little surprise. Thankfully, you don't have to fully deplete her health bar because a cutscene soon kicks in. While we saw part of this from Ayami's point of view, Kagami and Tatsumaru plunging into the roiling ocean, what exactly became of them after it? We cut to Kagami dragging Tatsumaru out of the ocean, seemingly having saved his life. Though she says he's not displeasing to the eye, it appears as though she's still poised to kill him. Could have just left him to drown and saved herself a job there. But as she plunges her sword, it digs into the sand instead. After a little mouth-to-mouth, Tatsumaru awakens. Though his life has been saved, his memories are lost. 2 months have passed since Tatsumaru and Kagami clashed. Since then, her servants have been busy nursing him back to health in order to take on his new role as one of the Lords of the Burning Dawn. Kagami introduces him as the freshly minted Seiryu, the Blue Dragon, to the other members. They're mostly on board with it, save for Genbu, who isn't a fan of the nepotism on display. If this were modern day, he would probably have a decent case to take to HR, but Kagami's got a labour shortage on her hands. With more workers needed to continue building the fire demon, she tasks Tatsumaru with, let's say, going to a village and unknowingly bringing a bunch of people on board. This level is exclusive to Tatsumaru and harkens back to stealth assassins. It's a tighter, more compact affair that sees you basically whacking villagers on the back of the neck to knock them out. You'll be making a lot more use of the verticality provided by rooftops here, which is a nice change of pace from all those flat environments. And even though you can dispatch enemies through normal methods, it counts as non-lethal damage, something the game doesn't outright tell you. It's a fairly trivial affair that basically works like an execute everyone level, so when the final guard is down for the count, your work here is done. When Tatsumaru returns to Kagami, she informs him that their secret harbour has been infiltrated by Gohda's troops and ninja. Obviously, with no memory of his ties to them, they're nothing more than an enemy to overcome, and the level itself is one you'll have visited with Rikimaru previously. Instead of Chinese pirates, you'll find Gohda's troops in their blue getup as you stalk cliffs and sandbanks at night. Your mission is to eliminate every last one of them. When that's been ticked off, Tatsumaru returns to the Chinese junk to find a warrior so old he's giving those ninja in the Azuma village a run for their money. I'm surprised he doesn't just collapse in a pile of dust under the weight of his armor. As you might expect, the guy isn't exactly quick, but his spear swipes do have some range to them. The saving grace is that you have plenty of time to heal if you get hit, but it's a fairly easy battle as far as Birth of the Stealth Assassins goes. After you forcibly euthanized him, Tatsumaru enters the hold of the ship to find the fresh corpse of Wang Jr. and Rikimaru. Seiryu reveals himself to Rikimaru, but his former clan member is obviously unable to crack his amnesia. When Tatsumaru returns to Kagami, she's none too pleased about Gohda's ninja exposing her secret harbour, so in retaliation, plans to attack his hidden quarantine village. Kind of strange motivation. I can only assume the angle is that if people know about the village, it may cause some unrest throughout the land. Either way, we've previously visited this location with Ayame, who was busy dispatching Burning Dawn ninja. Now, we're to exterminate all of Gohda's soldiers patrolling the village. Like, I don't know what type of contagion these people have, but surely having guards who come and go probably goes against some kind of WHO guidelines or something. Man's not even wearing a mask. When you've successfully slaughtered the guards, Tatsumaru joins Kagami at the foot of the stairs to the temple, where an emaciated villager begs for his life. While Kagami laughs in the face of the dying man, Tatsumaru is the one to call her out on her callousness. His ability to pierce through a cold facade exposes a more vulnerable side of the leader of the Burning Dawn. Tatsumaru embraces Kagami, a scene which Ayame was privy to as she arrived to take out the enemy ninja. Kagami believes that the cost of attaining her dream is shedding any notions of mercy or compassion, using her inhumanity as a foundation for a new world led by ninja. A vital step in attaining this dream is destroying the Azuma ninja village, an assault that Tatsumaru will lead. Just as it was in her side of the story, Ayame confronts Tatsumaru about who he truly is, and while it may seem like she's unable to reach him, the slight hesitancy before leaving may hint to something deeper. There's no fanfare to Tatsumaru's version of the assault on the Azuma ninja village. Whether that was a stylistic choice to reinforce his lack of connection or budgetary reasons, who knows. But after getting a taste for some geriatric punishment from his time on the boat, he's back for more. Though the ninja are positively ancient, they're not to be underestimated and are capable of getting a few hits in if you're not careful. Due to their shorter character models, you can't actually stealth kill them, so are forced to one-inch death punch all the Oji-sans. Thankfully, you're simply tasked with reaching Shunsai's hut, where you'll find your old master and Gohda tangling with Burning Dawn ninja. Gohda attempts to engage Tatsumaru but only earns a gut shot, laying him low. With just Shunsai and Tatsumaru, his former master reveals that he was the one that killed his father. Up until this point, there's been no mention of this whatsoever. A little strange that it's not even hinted at in any capacity. Shunsai, like other ninja you fought, does have a few tricks up his sleeve, like poison darts and smoke bombs, and the tight confines of the hut don't help too much. But if you dodge his screaming attacks, he's not too difficult to fight. Driving Izoyoi into Shunsai's chest proves to be the pebble that starts the avalanche to sweep away his amnesia. Before he can recall anything further, Rikimaru rushes into the hut. As he did during his playthrough, he's still unable to finish off Tatsumaru, leaving him and Kagami to flee to the giant cherry tree to catch their breath. Tatsumaru claims he's able to continue, to which Kagami calls him a
Big lug.
Kinda strange. In the Japanese, she basically tells him not to get carried away. We then get a shot that looks like, well, you can probably guess. Either that was intentional or they were oblivious. I'm going to go for the latter because that angle is omitted from the later Japanese release. Kagami mends his wounds and forbids him to die before they're interrupted by Ayame. Funnily enough, this scene was stripped back more heavily in the Japanese version too. I'm in two minds about it. In the English, Kagami shows a more emotional side here, which provides a more rounded dimension to her character, but the silent exchange and the single "wakatta, I understand" manages to encapsulate a lot of feeling in a simple response. In the end, Ayame is the one to open the floodgates on Tatsumaru's memory with her own dream she expressed to him years ago under this very tree. In English, it's marriage, and in Japanese, it's the same sentiment but with the words for kind of living together. More so than putting down a deposit on a house in the country, it's like sharing our lives. Noriyuki's music plucks at the heartstrings once again, but though Tatsumaru's memories have returned, he still died the day he plunged into the ocean. Seiryu leaves Ayame with a final warning. If she confronts him again, her life is forfeit. We're now on the final chapter of Tatsumaru's story. As blades clash in the night from the assault on the fire demon, Tatsumaru swears to hold Rikimaru and Ayame at bay. The revelation that his memories have returned comes as a shock to Kagami. Though he disagrees with her methods, her dream is the hill that he has chosen to die on. Kagami offers him a final embrace, proclaiming her love for Tatsumaru. She wishes events could have transpired differently. Tatsumaru then bids her a final farewell. His take on what is essentially Rikimaru's final level follows the same format, but with a slight caveat of needing to annihilate all of Gohda's forces. It's still a fun level, and playing with Tatsumaru just feels inherently snappier and more fluid than the younger ninja. In the end, when your mission is complete, you'll run into Jubei once again. It's ninja versus samurai, and the samurai has some pretty lengthy attack strings and a good chunk of health, but it's the same old dance. However, it's our final one. With Jubei defeated, we cut to the inevitable encounter with Ayame, which we saw play out in her story. Though the perspectives have changed, the ending is the same. Later, with her dwindling strength, Kagami crawls to be by Tatsumaru's side. As flaming arrows rain down around them, Kagami reflects that she may have chosen the wrong path to pursue her dream, a world where ninja can live in the light. With Tatsumaru and Kagami dead, the Burning Dawn is defeated and peace, however fleeting, has been restored to the land. But maybe not everyone died that night. Suzaku, or should we say Onikage, is a notoriously difficult ninja to defeat. His theme kicks in as Onikage proselytizes his Lord Meo and vows vengeance against the Azuma ninja. But that's a tale for the next game, which is the first game. Before we bring the curtain down, there were a few points that just didn't have enough meat on them to expand into full sections. The most prominent of these scraps is, sadly, the game's soundtrack or lack thereof. While Noriyuki did return and compose several tracks in what I can only assume was a limitation of the technology, no levels featured a soundtrack. What is there is great when it's actually a full-length piece, but it's used so sporadically that rather than becoming a tool to punctuate emotional scenes, it's often more of a surprise that as you go in, this game has music. Like it was in Stealth Assassins, Noriyuki's band provides the game's title track, Shoteki, which means target. The song is again written in Hausa, a Chadic language, and demonstrates some of the more experimental, genre-shifting musical progressions present in Stealth Assassin's soundtrack. As far as I'm concerned, Tenchu's music is just as large a part of what makes the game complete as its characters and locations. For it to be so apparently missing results in a lot of the game's soul being absent. What remains, while fantastic, is far too little to sustain a player after having arrived from Stealth Assassins. To take a break and quickly touch on Birth of the Stealth Assassins VO, it's a large step up from Stealth Assassins. However, voice actors can only work within the confines of the scripts they have and the direction they're given. On the whole, there are less memorable performances from bosses and some side characters. The narrative was pulled into that of the game's main story, mostly for the better. The game's story isn't flawless, but it should still be recognised as a massive improvement over Stealth Assassins, and honestly, it's the best the series would ever get, with relatively little to work on from a character standpoint, because in the previous games, characters only had a handful of lines. Don't get me wrong, they were memorable lines, but in the pursuit of a more grounded story, a little of that, let's say, strangeness was abandoned. For VO in the early 2000s, it's head and shoulders above others at the time. In Y2K, as far as cinematic storytelling in games goes, for the PS1 at least, Birth of the Stealth Assassins stood out along with others like Vagrant Story and Siphon Filter 2. The Metal Gear Solid connection doesn't just end with Paul Eiding as Master Shunsai. There's also Debbie Mae West, who voices Ayame, Meryl from MGS, Rino Romano, who voiced Rikimaru, would also go on to voice Darth Revan, SWTOR, and Luis in Resi 4. Michael Goff, the voice of Gohda, is the voice of Deckard Cain. The voice of Kagami, Mari K. Bergman, who was most known for doing a ton of voices on South Park, unfortunately passed away before the game's release. It's honestly a pretty sad story if you dig into it, but it is worth saying that she delivers the most memorable performance in Birth of the Stealth Assassins. She often vacillates between tyrant leader and this doubt-riddled human. In terms of performance, the weight of the story is on her, though at times it seems to step out of the game itself. I'd say it was more in the voice direction than Bergman's ability. She is, however, without a doubt, the series' most memorable antagonist. Finally, we've got Suzaku. While Onikage's performance in Stealth Assassins was so bad it's good territory, Eagles actually manages to elevate Suzaku above that, bringing a sinister tone which matches the man's ruthlessness. Once again, there's the MGS connection, with him having voiced Peter Stillman in Sons of Liberty. Out of all the characters in the game, Suzaku is perhaps my most favourite. Previously only available in an updated version of the game released in Japan, the mission editor is now a fixture in Birth of the Stealth Assassins. It's not the same as the Hyakusen version of Tenchu, wherein you had 100 or so player and dev created levels, though it does allow you to access some pre-made missions. The pre-made missions cover a number of locations, though they're better described as tile sets because outside of some aesthetic choices, the main building blocks remain the same. You've got your village, cavern, forest. There's quite a few locales available to play around in. You also find more variety in the type of objectives available within these missions. It's a real shame none of these objectives permeated the main game, and their inclusion makes it all the stranger. Aside from the execute everyone caveat, there's an absence of eliminating a specific target, stealing an item, or simply staying unseen throughout the entire level. Upon choosing a mission, you're given a choice of characters, though you are able to restrict certain missions to specific ones. The levels themselves are pretty primitive, mainly consisting of basic geometry dotted with guards. You can't acquire any new items during your mission, you only get what you're given. It makes the inclusion of rice potentially all the more baffling because there's no map. Or perhaps you're meant to use it to avoid getting confused when navigating the levels. With these essentially pared down missions, the draw distance is severely reduced and the game has to put a greater emphasis on Tenchu's core mechanics. It actually does itself some favours due to the restrictive areas because it forces guard patrols and clusters to become tighter. Combine this with the abundance of bottomless pits, trapdoors, and spear and arrow traps. These missions can actually offer more challenges than some of the base levels. In the majority of missions, you generally have a timer that increases along with candles to depict enemies present in the level. For a stealth kill, your timer decreases by 15 seconds, a normal kill removes 5, while being spotted adds 10 to your time, which was the same as in the previous incarnation of the editor. Oftentimes, some levels can be difficult to navigate and confusing due to the lack of a map, especially when it's an elimination mission and the slightly nerfed key meter makes locating enemies a real chore. A positive aspect is that music actually returns during these missions, which was a surprisingly welcome addition. On the whole, each level can take around a couple of minutes to around 10 minutes max to complete, depending on how lost you get. One hilarious mission in the editor was the one near the end where you're tasked with assassinating Master Shunsai in a medieval castle. Along with the baffling conceit, you'll find knights roaming the hallways as well as the odd royal wench scuttling about. During a run of this level, you can find one guard attempting to masquerade as a statue, which got a chuckle out of me. However, a few moments later, I got absolutely baited by the game when performing a stealth kill on a narrow platform. After performing the stealth kill, Tatsumaru instant transmissioned off the ledge to his death. When you've had your fill of playing Master Shunsai's handcrafted levels, you can take a stab at creating your own. You can name your mission, choose its location, objective, any character restrictions, and whether stealth is mandatory, that kind of thing. The editor is split into two sections, terrain and character placement. You have various building blocks like stairs, ground tiles, water, traps, and walls. You can also place some set dressing around to add a bit of flavour. One of the issues with the previous incarnation of the editor was that it was difficult to judge how you were placing objects, but you can now adjust the camera to zoom in and out and alter the angle to better understand how all your architecture fits together. On the character editor, you can choose where your character starts and where the boss is located. In addition to that, you can place enemies and define their patrol patterns. On the whole, defining patrol patterns is pretty simple, though the guards have a tendency to just do what they want at times and struggle when interacting with tighter geometry. A number of reviews at the time praised the level editor, and it's easy to see why. Back then, it was quite the novelty, and it's easy to just get lost building the perfect sandbox to test your skills. I believe the Japanese version of the game also included an expanded mission editor with more tile sets and locations available. You can even save your level to a memory card and share it with your friends. You know, you just need friends. I touched on the updated and expanded version of Birth of the Stealth Assassins in its native Japan before. In a sense, Endo thought of the Japanese release as a form of penance for the original release in the West. There's an interesting post that acts as a mini catalogue for the changes. We've already seen some of the cutscene differences, but the graphical changes to some models is probably the most apparent. Scratch that. What's most apparent is the constant vomiting VO in Ayami's quarantine village mission. It's like everyone in the village is recovering from some apocalyptic hangover. For funsies, let's take a look at a few of them side by side. There was a time where I ranked Birth of the Stealth Assassins above the original Stealth Assassins, and it's not since replaying them both and Wrath of Heaven that my perspective on the series has changed. The three games are fundamentally different experiences. We'll leave Wrath of Heaven out of it for now, but Stealth Assassins' smaller, diorama-like level design offers a much stronger stealth experience than Birth of the Stealth Assassins' more action-oriented approach. What's strange is that I'd see this parallel years later in Link's works Aragami and the follow-up Aragami 2. The transition is eerily similar, resulting in two separate stealth game experiences. While I do enjoy Birth of the Stealth Assassin's story and Acquire's stab at more expansive levels, it needed longer to bake. Tighten up the levels, ditch a bunch of useless items, tune the combat further. That's all well and good saying it now, but I do wonder what an alternate timeline would look like if Acquire were left to their own devices. Would we have just gotten Shinobi several years earlier? Guess we'll never know. However, credit where credit is due. While imperfect, the focus on narrative in Birth of the Stealth Assassins has always stuck with me most. At a time when it felt like grander, more thematic stories were confined to the realms of RPGs, Birth of the Stealth Assassins' imperfect story is an aspect the series would never recapture, and much like the music, its absence is painfully obvious. In 2000, Activision bought the Tenchu IP from Acquire. Development, for better and worse, would switch over to K2. While Tenchu would return, and on the PS2 in Wrath of Heaven, Acquire would pivot firstly to a new IP, Way of the Samurai, great game by the way, but would then return to the shadows in the Shinobi series. Finally, and quite strangely, in 2008, Acquire would return to Tenchu with Shadow Assassins. But for now, our story will next pick up after the events of Stealth Assassins in Tenchu, Wrath of Heaven. Take it easy.